Good morning, everyone. I should like to welcome the viewing and listening audience to the night meeting of the Joint Select Committee on Finance and Legal Affairs. Today, the committee is convening its first public hearing pursuant to its inquiry into the efficiency and effectiveness of the Central Statistical Office. Members of the listening and viewing audience are invited to post or send their comments via the Parliament's various social media platforms, Facebook page, ParlView, the Parliament's YouTube channel, and Twitter. I will now welcome officials of the Ministry of Planning and Development and the Central Statistical Office. And I'm now going to, before I invite them to identify the members of their committee, I will tell you that I am Hazel Thompson Ahi, and I'm chairman of this committee. And I will first invite the members of the committee to introduce themselves.
Good morning, Chair. Terence Dialse, member. Thank you.
Good morning, Clarence Ramrat, Deputy Chairman.
Good morning, everyone. I am Jayanti Lachmial, member of the committee.
Good morning, everyone. I am Hassel Bacchus, member of the committee.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Keith Scotland, member.
I now invite officials of the Ministry of Planning and Development to introduce themselves.
Good morning, Madam Chair. My name is Joanne Deoraj, Permanent Secretary, Ministry of Planning and Development.
Good morning. My name is Andre Blanchard, Acting Director of Statistics, Central Statistical Office.
Good morning. My name is Cherry Ann Joseph, the Change Manager, Ministry of Planning and Development.
Good morning. My name is Sati Budu, Acting Assistant Director of Statistics.
Hello, good morning. My name is Eva Mahavia Das. I'm the Senior Statistician in the National Accounts Division, Central Statistical Office.
Good morning. Andrea
Blanchard. Mr. Andre Blanchard is not here?
Yeah. I am. Yes, I am.
Introduce yourself.
Andre Blanchard, Acting Director of Statistics, Central Statistical Office.
Thank you. Now, the objectives of this inquiry are: one, to assess the effectiveness of the CSO in fulfilling its mandate to provide relevant and current data for national policy development. Two, to determine the existing gaps in the creation of a modern, relevant, and objective National Statistical Institute. And three, to evaluate the change management systems and procedures that are proposed to manage the transition to the new proposed National Statistical Institute. I now invite, from maximum of 2 minutes, the Permanent Secretary in the Ministry of Planning and Development, Ms. Joanne Duraj, to make brief opening remarks.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good morning, Madam Chair and members of the Joint Select Committee on Finance and Legal Affairs. Thank you for the invitation into this inquiry on the efficiency and effectiveness of the Central Statistical Office of Trinidad and Tobago. The mandate of the Ministry of Planning and Development is that of developing medium to long-term development plans. And the ministry charts and supports the overall socioeconomic development of Trinidad and Tobago through investigating, proposing, and monitoring policy prescriptions which lead to desired outcomes. The Central Statistical Office is therefore an integral partner in the development of the requisite data and information to guide this development process. The Central Statistical Office of Trinidad and Tobago has been one of the earliest governance institutions created in Trinidad and Tobago, even prior to independence. The Central Statistical Office was established as a department under the Statistical Act, Chapter 1902, Act 26 of 1952, and has been an integral institution in Trinidad and Tobago's post-independence governance structure and has attained global recognition as the country's main producer of official statistics. It serves as the primary repository of national statistical data. The main responsibilities of the CSO lie with that of conducting censuses in the Republic of Trinidad and collecting, compiling, analyzing, and publishing statistical information. The CSO collaborates with other government departments in the production, publication of statistical records, of administration, and coordinated schemes of economic and social statistics related to Trinidad and Tobago. The CSO also has a responsibility for coordinating the national statistical system to ensure the production and dissemination of high-quality official statistics that meet the statistical demands locally and internationally. Over the years, the Central Statistical Office has been part of the efforts to strengthen and modernize its operations, and we at the Ministry of Planning and the CSO continue to work assiduously to deliver on its mandate. Madam Chairman, I thank you again for the opportunity to meet with the committee, and my team stands ready to provide any information that would assist the committee on its deliberations. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Dioraj. Mr. Blanchard, please.
Hi, good morning. The CSO has basically faced a number of challenges in the recent past. But I'm here to state today that we have maintained the production of our core statistical products and basically maintain the timeliness of our data sets according to our dissemination schedule. We are involved in a number of transition projects as we try to progress to the new institution. We have started producing quarterly GDP, which previously we have never done before. We have almost finished a revision of our labor force survey design, a new design. And basically, we have tried to be more transparent in our dissemination of data and our methods by adhering to international standards of data dissemination and, showing our methodologies and how we process our data. So we think we have made a great progress. We have a lot more to do, and thank you for inviting us here to give an account of what we have done.
Thank you, Mr. Blanchard. We will now commence the questioning by the committee. I would just like to remind committee members and officials to direct their questions and concerns through the chair, not to each other. Activate the microphone on your device when you're speaking, and when you've completed what you had to say, please turn it off when you have finished your contribution. So we begin. This is a very important inquiry. We know that statistics drive a number of things, not only official things, but even in your daily life. You don't know that sometimes a simple question as to how much potato I should put in the doubles is because somebody has looked to see the trend by assessing what is happening out there in the community, how many children you have, a number of things moved, go through because of statistics, because people need to know what is happening, the trends, so they will know how to proceed, how to develop.
Madam Chair, I hope we never get to the point where it could be said that any of us contributed to potato being in doubles. But I take your point.
It's just, it is an everyday life and not something esoteric. It drives us in a number of ways.
That would be on our front to, that wouldn't be covered by parliamentary privilege.
So we begin with the ministry. What is the role of the Ministry of Planning and Development in relation to the administration of the Central Statistical Office?
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair, for that question. The Ministry of Planning and Development serves as the line ministry to support the work of the Central Statistical Office. As you are aware, the Central Statistical Office is an independent entity, but in terms of its operations of statistical data. But it also has administrative functions, and the Ministry of Planning serves as that support in terms of administrative oversight for its human resource services, ICT infrastructure, monitoring and of performance of the CSO's public sector investment program. The permanent secretary serves as the authorizing officer for spending limits that exceed that of the director of statistics. We provide advice related to financial and other regulations, guidance, records management, and help with facilitating the stakeholder discussions and support to the organization and advocating for its role within the national development of Trinidad and Tobago.
Thank you. Now, how is the data generated by the CSO utilized to inform policy development and planning at the Ministry of Planning and Development? Yes?
Yes, so the Ministry of Planning and Development, as I'd indicated, serves as the agency that drives national development, and we have had several products out of the Ministry of Planning and Development, including the National Development Strategy 2030. We've also assisted in the development and the strategic outcomes of the Road to Recovery and the Community Recovery Reports. So our role really is that of ensuring that the development plans combine not only policy dialogue, but also evidence-based. And the work of the CSO assists us in helping the articulation of these development policies. So we utilize the information that the CSO produces, which could range from, of course, population, housing census, agricultural information, the domestic production index, retail sales, etc. The broad data sets and core data that is the CSO develops. And then depending on the type of products that the ministry has to produce, we use the data from the Central Statistical in collaboration and ensuring that we understand the data and we apply it properly to the analyses that are coming out of the ministry. So some of the work that we have done include, of course, the national performance framework that we have developed by the Ministry of Planning and Development, which serves as a monitoring and evaluation tool to support the National Development Framework Vision 2030. Now, within that National Development Framework, we have qualitative and quantitative indicators. And of course, the CSO would support in strengthening the production of this document to ensure that the data that we use as baseline data would be monitored and measured as we do certain types of interventions that would result in changes in the development outcomes. The CSO has also been very integral in our voluntary national review under the United Nations for the Sustainable Development Goals. We did our first report to the UN in July of 2020, and we continue to develop all the other tools under the Sustainable Development Goals. As you know, Trinidad and Tobago reported in the 2020 report on 8 development goals, and we continue to work on some of the others that we are trying to help our entities serve in terms of gathering data so that we will continue to be very robust in our reporting to United Nations. The CSO has also been a very strong advocate in terms of working on other development topics, whether it's migration, whether it is educational data, supporting our other line ministries so that they can adequately report on the situation as it exists in Trinidad and Tobago. So we serve both as a producer of reports as well as a facilitator to ensure that the stakeholders who need to access the Central Statistical Office, we serve as a conduit and advocate for the work that the CSO is doing.
In policy development, there are certain steps. Could you explain the basic steps we move from policy development, the cycle?
Yes, so we use the policy cycle throughout the whole, so it would entail, first of all, of course, the saying what is the problem that we're trying to address. We would get the primary data. We may do some desk research in terms of what is available under the system, what is available existing in the data, all the data hubs throughout Trinidad and Tobago. Then we would go towards developing, if we wish to do our own data collection by doing much more robust methodologies, we would go out for more studies being undertaken either through the ministry or through consultancies. When that data is collected and we prepare necessary policy documents, it goes out for national consultation, and then we formulate that into a policy statement to the cabinet. Once it is accepted, then we go out for wider national consultation. In the policy cycle, that then translates into, of course, the budgeting process, which is under the public sector investment program, to be ensured that the initiatives and strategies that we have identified in the policy are adequately financed and executed. And then, of course, we go to the next stage of the policy cycle, which is the monitoring and evaluation, to ensure that we, in fact, monitor the impacts of both the outputs that we have identified under the strategies and then the collective outcomes that we are seeing as a result of the intervention. So it's a continuous cycle of development from the first concept of what is the problem statement, and then going through the different stages of the development process. I hope that answers the question, Madam Chair.
I just want one follow-up question, though. Along this cycle, what would you say is the weakest link in making this continuous cycle flow?
Sometimes I would not. I think each stage is equally challenged. We have seen that sometimes we don't have the technical expertise in the policy development for certain subject areas. So of course we'll have to source that, and that could be a challenge financially. Implementation is also quite when we look at financing projects and programs, both a challenge in getting all the financial resources, but of course sometimes the implementation challenge is equally difficult because sometimes there's no capacity at the different ministries and agencies. And then monitoring and evaluation itself, while it has been with us for some time, the capacity in that area continues to be a challenge from the point of view of agreeing on national indicators and indicators that persons can work towards and agree that they are working towards. And when that is agreed upon, supporting it by the robust programming and projects. So I don't think there's only one challenge, but there are several challenges. And I think the Ministry of Planning and Development has been working with our stakeholders to try to strengthen in a number of areas from the policy cycle, from the point of view of getting technical support from the Inter-American Development Bank and other international agencies about helping us build the capacity across the public service in policy development. We've also been doing work in the public sector investment program and helping persons in terms of training and project management. And the recent, I would say recent, about 2-3 years ago, we had what we call the project screening brief, so that ministries and agencies can develop better projects for submissions under the public sector investment program. That monitoring and evaluation tied to that project screening brief, both from the project planning and reconstruction division, they will look at the monitoring of the outputs. And then, of course, there is the National Transformation Unit, which looks at how all these collective activities are contributing to national development through the monitoring and evaluation of the National Development Strategy. each stage of the policy cycle, we have been working towards trying to strengthen the process.
Thank you. Of course, you will have not much control over how the public, feedback that you get from them.
Certainly. In terms of the public feedback, we have been trying to, of course, there are different ways that the public would interact with us, either through public consultations or through surveys, and so that we might undertake simple surveys, but the public will always will be open. We are always open to the contributions of the public, because it also helps us to reframe and think about some of the strategies that we need to develop. So it is an ongoing process, and we have to be available. At the end of the day, we are here to serve the citizens. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions from members?
Chair, I wanted to ask about the development of a website for the CSO from the ministry. The response from the ministry stated that they were facilitating an updating of the website. Or can you give us an update on this development or the updating of the CSO website? And, what do you have a timeline in mind? Because I think that the availability of data to the public via our website is very important. And so we would want to hear a little bit more about that CSO website and how the ministry is driving that updating process.
Thank you very much for the question, member. The CSO has its own website, and I think Mr. Blanchard could speak a little bit more about that in terms of the data that is available on the website. But as the website serves as two layers. One, we have the Ministry of Planning's website, of which the CSO is, you can click on the Ministry of Planning website and connect to the CSO. And then, of course, you have the CSO website, which is really much more directed at data processing and things like that. So we have been working to ensure that the data is always kept up to date. We're looking at a new provider and other systems that will help us in terms of strengthening the website and keeping the website up to date. It is a project under the whole modernization thrust towards the CSO, and we will anticipate through the procurement process that within the next few months that we will have that settled through the Ministry of Planning and Development. Most of the time, attempts are being done to utilize the funds before the end of the fiscal year. So I don't know, Mr. Blanchard wants to speak about the data that is available through the website.
Yes, the CSO a few years ago had, worked with a consultant to update our website. Basically, the updating worked on two ends. They made it easier for us at the office to upload data, which is not a trivial matter. If it's easier to upload data, it's far quicker to put on data. But also, we worked on the interface of the website and made it easier to access time series type data. So, a lot of users want time series data for their users, and they updated the website, made it easier to obtain that type of data. But also we have, attempted to put more data on the website. In fact, right now we are working with a consultant with the IDB in terms of making our data more open and available. And part of the process is putting more data on the website and with longer time series for all economic and social indicators, of which we have done, and we'll continue to do so. And the data itself, is up to date, that it's easier to access, but of course we can always make improvements, and in the future we'll continue to improve it. and take feedback from our data users. And again, put more data on the website, and we have done so. I think it's a big improvement on what we had before, but there's still some work to do, and we'll be making progress on that matter in the future. Thank you.
Thanks,
Thank you. Member Scotland? Sorry, you had a follow-up? If not, Mr. Scotland?
Yes, all right. Follow-up question.
Chairman, it is not a follow-up. When Member Lakshmi Dial is finished, I have a synergy issue I'd like to raise, please.
Thanks. Just a follow-up on the data available right now from the CSO chair. I was wondering how much historical data is available via the website? How many years? I know that the process of loading the data onto our website is something, but I just wanted to find out about the historical data that may be available via the CSO website currently.
Yes. So previously on our website, and again, in working with the IDB consultant who is working on the open data with us, he would identify that, we had some time series data, but they would only go back, 5-10 years. So he has recommended that we put longer time series. And right now we're in the process of doing that. We are going into basically our paper files and uploading the digital data so that we could have, 20, 30 year series where available. And much of that data we do have. It's just making it available to the public so that they can do their statistical analysis and determine trends. The IDB consultant is going to be working with us until the end of June, and part of the process is converting all of that data into non-proprietary formats that can be easily downloaded. We have converted 70% of our data sets to the right format, and working with the consultant to increase our time series data, and that process is ongoing. Thank you.
Member Bacchus has a follow-up question. If you bear with him, please, Mr. Scotland. I'll take you after.
Yes, Chair.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Yes, as it stands now, the website is not available to the public, right?
No, the website is available to the public.
The CSO website?
The CSO website.
Interesting. Because the searches I did this morning led me to a website that says upgrading in progress and would be available soon.
I'm not sure if that is something recent, but
it says,
a few days ago.
Actually,
Yeah.
I'm looking at it now. It says Ministry of Planning and Development, CSO Office, upgrading website will be available soon. And a locked pad on it.
Member, we will check on that, and but we know that the website is up. I don't know if one of the other members.
Yes.
Yes. Okay. Okay. So we will check into that, but we have been working on that. It is an up and available website, so we will check into that and advise.
Okay, and the follow-up to that obviously the ministry itself has been providing IT support to the CSO. Could you elaborate a bit on what that is, and is this part of that arrangement?
So the Central Statistical Office, thank you very much, Member. The Central Statistical Office has their own IT unit, but we also have an IT unit at the Ministry of Planning and Development. So there's collaboration between the two entities so that we can both, in terms of upgrade of equipment, in terms of harmonization between the ministry and the CSO. So that is there's that collaboration. The communication department, which is also integral as to what should be the content on the website. The CSO doesn't have a communication department, so there is collaboration as well with the communication department. Over the years, when we did the modernization and the issues that were developed through the number of consultancies that we've had with the CSO, the issue of technological upgrade has been a central point. And we have been working over the years, although we have no final decision with respect to the volume of funding available to make this technological upgrade of the CSO. We've been working every year through the Public Sector Investment Program to strengthen the CSO. The CSO has also been working with its development partners to bring new technology to the CSO and the data collection processes. And of course, Mr. Blanchard would be much better to be able to describe those things. But it would be the use of what they call the CAPI and the other types of tools that will, as you collect the data, is uploaded into the system, and the officers are being provided with the iPads and the different tools that will be able to collect that data on a regular basis. Some of the data collection sets, particularly that of the continuous samples survey of the population, they're using that, and we are hoping that as we move to strengthen the technology of the CSO, all the officers, all the field staff will be using this type of technology in all the data collection processes. So there is a cooperation between the CSO and the Planning Ministry with respect to that agenda.
Member Scotland, sorry.
Chairman, I think my question will flow flawlessly from the last response. Some of your, and it goes Ministry of Planning and Development, we know, Chairman, that some of their work will involve IT and virtual, but some of their work also involves face-to-face contact with the public. Has there been any policy or any processes implemented between the Ministry of Planning and Development and the CSO that will cover the protocols that will govern interaction, face-to-face interaction when it's necessary as it relates to the advent of COVID-19? Because that there would need to be a protocol. Has there been, or if not, when is it going to be done?
Okay, thank you very much for the question, Chair. Member, what we have been doing is that during the pandemic period, we really did not go into the field as in accordance with the public health ordinance and the public health regulations. We have not been able to collect the data because a lot of our technology would have required us to be face-to-face. Some of the surveys that we had, particularly some of them would require, one of them would be the multiple indicators cluster sample, which would require really going into households and taking measurements of children, etc. So during the period of time, we've asked the support of the Ministry of Health to help us ensure that we adhere to guidelines when that time comes out for us to go into the field again. We have been using the PPE, the equipment, things like face mask, and the staff would be properly provided with this in gear so that they can go out and collect the data. We do know, though, that the public is very, they're still very timid about this face-to-face, still collect the data because the public will not want the face-to-face interaction even under good protocols because they don't want to have that level of interaction. But Mr. Blanchard could also speak a little bit more about some of the work that he's been doing with his field staff.
Yes, so when restrictions were eased, our field staff did return to the field, but they were obeying all protocols advised by the ministry. When interviewing, there's no need to be, very close to the person that you're interviewing. They stay far apart from the person. The household members could remain in the house while the interviewer is outside. And as the Permanent Secretary has said, use all the personal protection equipment as necessary. In addition, she has mentioned the multiple indicator cluster survey, which is a very interactive survey. And we had got approval from the Chief Medical Officer and on the protocols that we had submitted to him. So he has approved those protocols, and once we're able to leave, that will happen soon. But the public, yes, there are a few that have, hesitant to supply data, but by and large, we are making progress. And, my field supervisor advises me that, yes, they are from the Chief Medical Officer, making progress, and particularly with the labor force data, which is a household-based survey. And we continue to work. And, I think for most people, I understand that the data is to be used for decision making and planning, and once they are satisfied that 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 the data that will be used in their interests, that they will be supplied the data. But we are obeying all protocols, and with the multiple indicator cluster survey, we have gotten CMO approval.
Chairman?
Yes, please, Mr. Scotland.
Through you, Chairman. Maybe if you ask the question, it will be answered. My question is, so we know that there's a pandemic, but we know that part of your work is to go face to face. Not all can be done virtually. Has the ministry linked with the CSO to develop a protocol, one with respect to when your members, when your workforce goes out to interact with the public? And I think as a suggestion that should be developed. And secondly, I think before it is implemented or after it be communicated to the public, so the public is sensitized, can you give us, this doesn't have to be a long answer, an update on one is, and two, would then the public be informed of this so that they are sensitized? Because if they are sensitized, then they'll be more receptive.
Member, we had not done it as an overall policy. We have done it as an overall policy between the Ministry of Planning and the CSO. What has happened is really it's policy, and as the different types of instruments are going to be administered, as in the case of the mixed survey. But your advice is noted, and we will put together with the CSO maybe one comprehensive policy, as well as doing some communication. Public, that is one of our greatest challenges, that when we go out in the field, even pre-pandemic, public, we have to be doing a communication strategy to advise that the CSO is out there collecting data in a particular community. And we need to know that we have developed a communication strategy, which is now being considered by the team here, because it's a very expensive one, but we are thinking that is a very vital process for us to be able to get public confidence in the work that we are doing at the CSO. So thank you very much for the guidance, and we will be working on that as our overall policy on your advice. Thank you.
Thank you. Before I go to Member Lakshmi, I'd like to say that while we were speaking, the website has become active and available, so you can actually access it. So, Ms. Member Bacchus, I thank you for that question, because it just takes sometimes a little prodding, for the miracles to happen, so that we're able to see a number of things on the website from the last few minutes ago, and I hope it will continue. Member Lakshmi.
Chair, thank you. I was also looking at the website, and I thought that's why my question, I thought that the website was actually under review, because I also encountered the same issue as Member Bacchus. But with respect to the use of the website or computer-assisted web interfacing, I've seen the advertisements going out about census. I think it's a population census to be conducted this year. How big a role does the ministry or the CSO, how big a role do you think it will play now, especially given the COVID-19 situation, to have the computer, what is it called, computer-assisted web interfacing as a means of collecting data for this particular census? And as a follow-up to that, cost-wise, will it be a significant increase in the cost of conducting the census if it is that you have to implement more technology as a means of addressing, the health concerns and so on, and to minimize the risk to your field staff?
I think I will take one part, and Mr. Blanchard will speak to the other part. The cost of a national census is always very high, but it is a part of development. It is run every 10 years, and the type of data sets that are collected are used over the 10-year period in terms of how population growth is projected. So it's a very important tool. In the last time we did the census, we had quite a large budget, and we anticipate that higher this time. One, not only because the type of data that we want to collect, always want to improve on the questions that we collect data on. And we also want to use a hybrid. We are suggesting that we use a hybrid where we can use technology as well as a face-to-face interaction. Because in some communities, we know that it may be better to go out and to collect the data, versus some persons really can manage to do the answering of the questions themselves. Some of the questions are a little bit technical, so the guidance of a field officer walking through the questions with you is also very helpful when we have to do that. One of the things that impact the census cost would be, of course, staff, salaries, administrative cost. And of course, you have to go into the field. The recruitment of the staff is quite a large number of persons who are hired to do this process. And then, of course, there is the data cleaning and development of the reports, etc. So it's a very timely but necessary cost associated for national development. So Mr. Blanchard could speak much more on that aspect.
Yes, and we have started using computers assisted personal interviewing, where we have a tablet and we collect the data on the tablet and it's uploaded on a number of our smaller surveys, and we have developed experience in that. So we envisage going forward actually that for all our household type surveys, we'll be using that methodology and that technology going forward. It will increase certain costs for the census, because if you're using the tablets or the computer device, that's a cost in itself. But once that money is spent on those devices, we'll use those devices for future surveys and future generational type work in terms of data collection. In terms of the computer-assisted web interviewing, that's something that we're exploring for the first time. We are working with the Statistics Canada very closely, monthly. The experts in the field and these new technologies. They're actually thinking that perhaps we have been a little bit too ambitious in implementing these new technologies, but we do think with the pandemic that computer-assisted web interviewing, can alleviate or reduce some of that risk, and then those that we do not collect via that method, we'll try to collect by the computer-assisted personal interviewing. And so those two methods are methods that we propose to use in the future. We also would like to make more use of telephone interviewing to collect data as well. The data will still be uploaded on the devices and onto our servers. But, certain restrictions in terms of resources, but we're working on that. So these multimodal approaches are what we plan to do in the future, and it will involve some short-term costs in terms of devices. But we think it's worth it, and it will improve the efficiency in terms of the dissemination, processing, and then dissemination of data. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so,
now, Mr. Sorry.
I just have one follow-up.
All right.
Yeah. So, I mean, and I agree with you. You're saying that this, the implementation of greater ICT is an investment that will last long into the future. I didn't get an answer about the impact on the budget for this upcoming census. So could either the ministry or CSO say what is the budget and how much of that budget, or how much of an increase in that budget do you foresee if you're particularly using the computer-assisted web interviewing? Because I'm concerned about that because I think that that's very important moving forward in this census. Do you have an estimated cost that would be associated with implementing greater use of the computer-assisted web interviewing?
Well, I think the budget right now, is in the vicinity of 150 million. And it'll be surprising to know that the actual technological cost is really a minor part of that overall cost. We still depend on field staff. So it is really the HR cost is the major component of that, and still is, because even if you're using computer-assisted web interviewing and CAPI, you still need follow-up. You still need field officers to follow up on incomplete, survey instrument completions and queries and such. So still the major cost is still the cost of the human cost of undertaking a survey, and the technology is actually a relatively very small part of it.
Okay. Thank you.
Rambaran?
Thank you very much. I've been following and I've been listening to two categories, the investments being made and the future, what you plan for the future. I just want to ask this question. In my mind, you're dealing with three versions of the CSO. One is the current version. Two, the National Statistical Institute, which is proposed, and that could either be an institute created out of special majority legislation or an institute created out of simple majority legislation. How are you managing and planning in the context of having to do the work of the CSO, but also in the context of planning for an institution which will likely come, but we still cannot determine how far in the future it would come and what it would look like? How are you planning and managing in those circumstances when, I don't want to say you're in limbo because you're actually doing your functions, but something else is expected to emerge at some time in the future?
Right. So a big part of that transition process really is expanding our product portfolio, so to speak, and having a bigger range of statistical products available to the user, improving the timeliness of our data sets, being more transparent. So when you talk about that difference between the CSO and the new National Statistical Office, basically there's no conflict in terms of that transition. We are making changes now under the current CSO that are necessary for the new organization to come. So working with our international development partners, we are extending the range of national account products that we have used. For instance, the implementation of the quarterly GDP, which is really, in my mind, one of the biggest things that happened to the CSO and the country for a while. Still to this day, there are a few countries in the Caribbean producing quarterly GDP. Previously, we only produced annual. So that's part of the transition process to the new organization, where you have higher quality, more frequent economic indicators, and we are doing that. Revising our labor force survey, making sure that it adheres to the standards of the ILO, the International Labour Organization. So a lot of the work are basically synchronized in terms of what we need to do and a new organization. And then, of course, there are the other aspects of it in terms of administration. But in terms of the statistical work, it's not a difficult thing because it's something that we need to do, whether we move to the new organization or not. And it just happens that the two goals and objectives coincide.
Thank you. Now, in your submission from the ministry, you stated that the ministry provides assistance in the recruitment and selection of CSO staff, as well as the management of its staff in terms of promotion, discipline, and so on. Now, does the ministry think that the current manpower of the CSO staff is adequate?
Thank you for the question, Chair. Yes, as the line ministry, we would work very closely with the CSO. There is, of course, the establishment figures under the establishment of the CSO. So we work with the DPA through our Human Resource Division to ensure that the vacancies that we do have are indeed filled. Now, and I guess this will link very closely to the previous question, the organization as we see now and the organization for the future. So the current establishment, if we want to do the kind of work that is being requested of us, does not really meet the requirements that we need. We need a lot more persons with who are statisticians. Recently, we were able to get from the Public Service Commission the appointment of persons as statisticians, but we really do need to get many, many more. And when we talk about the National Statistical Institute, we had in that plan for the transition into national statistical expertise in terms of like a demographer and more statisticians and a broader base, a number of assistant directors in charge of different parts of the portfolio of the National Statistical Institute. So for the kind of work that the CSO needs to do, we need to be able to try to get into the next stage of its development, which we believe is the National Statistical Institute, and expand the operations of the CSO, because the human work that the team now is doing, they really are trying to stretch themselves and do all what needs to be done, but they really do need more capacity. When we look at the census, and if we have to have a complete census operation, you're talking about different human resources for the census running parallel to the operations of a statistical office. So it's really quite a lot of skills that you require to be able to do the kind of work that we need to do under a statistical institution. So to answer, Chair, what we have it's not as good as what we would like it to be. So we really would like to get more resources into the CSO. Over the last few years, we've been able to regularize a lot of the staff, persons who were under delegated authority for a number of years, and we've been able to sort that out. So they found themselves into properly established positions in the CSO. So we have quite a good complement of staff, but we don't have the breadth and depth of the numbers that we would like to have.
Has the body, the CSO, submitted a proposed revised organizational structure to the ministry for its consideration?
The proposed organizational structure is within the reports of the National Statistical Institute, what we would like to see. So we have org structures there, and we do have that as what we would like to move to once we have the provision of the law to allow us to do that. That document was developed as one of the products coming out of the subcommittees that were developed to look at the Statistics Sweden's reports, as well as the technical reports that were done as a consequence of those consultancies. So we have a number of products developed already, waiting for hopefully the passage of the legislation.
In the interim and even after, are you going to propose improved opportunities for training and continuous professional development for CSO staff?
Yes, certainly. Currently, we have, and Mr. Blanchard would be able to attest that as well. We try to access all the development opportunities now and to ensure that we adhere to good statistical practices by being involved in all the international training programs and conferences, etc. We have been working with IMF CARTAC, and he will be able to tell you a bit about that intervention in terms of building capacity. But under the National Statistical Institute, there will be a board. Once it's established, a board and that sort of development processes where there will be capacity building. Of course, I'm looking for continuous development and standard development, trace all that we can through CARICOM, through of course, Canada, Stat Sweden, Canada. They have a special project with us at the moment, and we've been developing their staff in the ministry. We've also had support from the European Union over the years. So I don't know, Mr. Blanchard will be able to give a little more details of those types of strategic interventions.
Yes, so the CSO has been working with our international development partners, IDB, Statistics Canada, and the IMF itself. The IMF has been working with us in terms of our national accounting, which is a set of tables where we produce GDP, among other things. We are producing some tables now. We would like to do a lot more in terms of different types, capital formation. In fact, the consultant is supposed to work with us in the coming weeks to extend the range of accounts that we produce, while continually looking at the quality of the products that we produce. Under the IDB funding, we've hired a consultant again to work in developing our labor force survey, making sure that the survey instrument aligns with the latest standards by the ILO. And we have been in communication with and having meetings with the experts from the ILO itself to improve that labor force survey. So these are two areas of capacity development that we are quite proud of. Stats Canada is working with us on and have been working with us in terms of developing our register of establishments and basically improving certain indices of trade. So there are a number of areas that we're quite pleased that we are making progress in terms of capacity development.
Member Bacchus?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just a couple of things. So obviously, Central Statistical Office is a data-driven environment. So your analysis, your outputs really depend specifically on the quality of the data that you have. How are you ensuring that the quality of the data that you have is right, that it is? And of course, how are you securing that data? So one is to collect it, which you're working on different ways of doing that. But when you collect it, how do you validate that this data is in fact correct and that it is applicable to what you're doing? And then more than that, how do you protect it to ensure that a lot of the data I'm sure a lot of people would like to get their hands on, but it includes competitive data? How do you secure that to make sure that it doesn't fall into the wrong hands?
Right. So I'm happy that you did mention one particular point is that the CSO depends on acquiring data in order to produce, So I've mentioned previously that the CSO is like a manufacturing company. We depend on raw materials, and that raw materials is the data that people supply to us. So, I just want to emphasize that point, yes. So the surveys that we undertake and the survey instruments that we have implemented have all been well developed in conjunction with working with our international development partners. They review the questionnaires, and much of it has already been tested, externally. So in terms of the logical flow and the objectivity of it all. And so that in terms of the data collection and then the validity of the survey, that is of high standard. Once that data is collected, we undergo processes where we validate the data. If certain expected data sets exceed certain boundary or ranges, they're flagged. In our large household surveys, we produce a number of error reports, and it undergoes an editing process whereby, for instance, with households, we query the data. Households may be called back. Field officers may return to the field. So it undergoes a multi-layer approach by different supervisors, whether it's from editing, coding, and ensuring that there's certain consistency in the data sets. In terms of the confidentiality of the data, that's extremely important to us. As long as I've been working at the CSO, I know this staff has always paid great attention to our obligation to keep that data in confidence. The staff only have access to data sets that they're working on. All members of the CSO have to take an oath of secrecy, and there are severe penalties, I think including jail time for revealing data sets. We disseminate data only in aggregate, and try to remove any identifying data whenever we give our data. So we take this very seriously. All the criticism that might be directed at the CSO, I think that's the one that has least weight. We have always taken great concern about keeping data in confidence. So I think in those measures, and again, we maintain that our data sets limited to only those who have access and need to know basis. So I'm quite confident that our data sets and the sensitive information is kept in confidence, and that we need to do that because keeping data in confidence builds trust, and people are not going to want to give us data if they find out that their data is out there. And so it's in our interest to ensure that the data is secure. Thank you.
Thank you. Now, I started off by saying we will look at the ministry. We will have the question of the ministry first and then go to CSO. But actually what has happened is that it's been integrated. But I'd like to focus more on CSO at this point. And so we'll take it from here. Now. Members?
Chair, well, I could get started if it's okay with you.
Please proceed.
Thank you, Chair. Through you, I wanted to ask about the CSO submission that that a needs assessment survey hasn't been completed for some time. Why? Could you tell us a little bit more about why this hasn't been done? And, what really is the purpose of the needs assessment survey, and how is that necessary to drive the work of the CSO?
Yeah, so when I said a need assessment survey hasn't been done recently, I mean one undertaken specifically by the CSO. But of course, we have had our data sets accessed by various international organizations, including Stats Canada, certain data sets. In terms of the IMF, in terms of our economic data, particularly output and prices. So they ensure that the variables that we need, that the public needs to make economic planning decisions, and including labor force data as well with the IDB, and that those data sets meet certain requirements. Could you just repeat the question again in terms of?
But the reasons why you really need to do the needs assessment survey, and why one hasn't really been done.
So those again. So in terms of basically, a National Statistical Office has a number of core outputs that basically meet most of the users' needs. That's why they're core data sets. They meet all the requirements for social and economic planning. But yes, in terms of undertaking a specific needs assessment survey, we have not done that. Probably in terms of resources, we would need to undertake one in the future. But we have enough feedback from international organizations about the data sets that we produce and how it aligns to what data sets are produced internationally. So they have already identified certain data gaps, particularly in terms of social indicators. We need to do more in terms of gender, child, and youth. And those are areas that are well, you can compare with your data gaps by aligning yourself with what other NSOs who are top line NSOs produce. And so these data sets really are consistent with what users need. And by aligning ourselves and being assessed by international organizations, we can easily identify our data gaps. And as I said, the CSO has basically been fairly strong in terms of our economic output. But, we still have a lot to do in terms of our social statistical output. And that's basically just from the tradition of how CSO was created. But we are working with our international development partners, and particularly with the Sustainable Development Goals, where we need to increase our data sets.
Right. So you've identified, let's drill down there a little bit, because you've identified the social side as opposed to the economic side. as being where most of the data gaps exist. Do you have now, because you've mentioned a number of international bodies that would have assisted you with your what has taken the place really of a needs assessment survey to assess your outputs, and they've identified those gaps. Do you have a list, or can you produce for us a list of the major gaps that have been identified, let's say on the social side, and what steps you plan to take to fill those gaps and to close those gaps, and the time frame for doing so?
Right. So I mentioned child statistics, youth statistics, gender statistics. In all the meetings I've gone to, gender statistics is the biggest issue. And it's not just about identifying data by male and female, going way beyond that. So those are areas that you for instance in gender statistics, and you may have a manual that is very thick in of itself. We have just been producing the bare minimum, really, and partly because of staff restrictions in terms of the available resources. That when we talk about moving to the new organization and having a enhanced staffing structure, that will allow us to really develop a particular social sector unit that can collect data, because CSO doesn't produce all of the data. A lot of the social indicator data exists outside of the CSO, so it needs to be coordinated. You need staff to coordinate that data collection. So the statistical aspect of it is the social sector is where we need to look at. And once we acquire the resources, we will be able to focus on that and start to produce.
Sorry.
Okay, if you can't answer now, could you provide the list of the things and the time frames, if it's possible?
Of social indicators, we can provide that list.
Yeah, thank you.
Mr. Blanchard, do you get statistics from the court? You mentioned child abuse, but what about child justice? If I wanted to find out how many children have been charged before the court or brought before the court who are under 12 years of age, will you be able to provide that information? Is there any way that you can get that information?
No, currently we're not able to provide that data, but we need to ensure that whatever statistical framework we have for social indicators, that it aligns itself with meeting the commitments of the Sustainable Development Goals. The CSO would be unable to really to collect all data sets, because that will be almost infinite. So we have to identify the traditional indicators that will be able to meet most of the assessments of the welfare of children, of youth, of women. And, but these are things that we can explore. Those are things that could form part of the conversation in terms of meeting with stakeholders and engaging with stakeholders. And to the extent that that data is available, we can explore it in the future.
Thank you. I hope you're not suggesting that, the issue of child offenders don't come within the Sustainable Development Goals, because if you look, you'll see it will come under more than one goal, because you're talking about children and their treatment. Yes?
Yeah, so basically, the CSO, as I've mentioned before, in terms of social statistics, basically, maybe even the majority of the data that relates to the indicators come from outside of the CSO. So we really need to have a strong coordinating function, and that move to the new organization is going to increase that capacity for CSO to coordinate the collection of data. And once we have that enhanced authority, we can therefore get the sort of data that you're talking about from industrial courts on a much more timely and consistent basis. And so once we can satisfy our core data sets, and then even if there's needs for special commitments because of national concerns, outside of the international community, there may be localized national concerns, and the ministries or departments communicate to the CSO that these data sets important to us. Of course, we will look at it, but again, it all boils down in the end. Sorry to say this, but it all boils down to having enough resources to undertake this massive task.
Thank you.
Well, Chair, I think coming out of our analysis of the submission, but we've done some we've done a lot. We've touched on this a lot, but with respect to data collection practices in light of the pandemic, is there any other further information by way of policy development and practices and so on, or maybe perhaps identifying alternative sources of data and alternative methods of collection that the CSO would have considered over this 2-year period that we've been essentially under restrictions, and that you think would help going forward with improving your data collection? Specifically, I want to ask you about labor statistics. We've been hearing a lot about that, and a lot of people have been questioning the accuracy of different statistics being quoted by different people with respect to how many persons have become unemployed, how many persons have lost their jobs, how many businesses have been closed. Has CSO focused at all on the impact, and have you deployed different methods of collecting data in the pandemic, specifically with respect to the impact on the labor market of the pandemic?
All right, so alternative sources of data. And again, I'm glad you asked that again, because in the pandemic, for instance, I've mentioned previously that we have worked in terms of our price data. For instance, we had to be innovative in terms of being forced to collect alternative sources of data using digital data available in organizations' databases, and particularly too as well, one of the major trends of national statistical offices such as the CSO is the greater use of administrative data that is readily available. And when you can use data that is readily available, you reduce costs, you avoid respondent burden, and of course, if it's administrative data available, it removes the need to undertake certain types of surveys, which apart from reducing costs, if it's a household type survey that is necessary, it could reduce the risk in terms of a pandemic. So that desire for administrative data also can be enhanced by the move to the new organization and having greater authority to collect administrative data. And in terms of the labor force survey, yes, in terms of that's a major survey in us assessing the impacts of COVID-19. And so the survey in of itself is pandemic related. The labor force survey will tell you what happened to certain occupations and in certain industries during times of the pandemic. And we are taking great steps to try and improve the timeliness of that labor force survey. There is a possibility in the future going forward where we can, attach certain modules to the labor force survey, because it is a sample survey and we can ask particular questions on any issue, including COVID-19. But right now, we're making it a priority to make that labor force data up to date, so that we can move to the revised labor force survey, which we want to undertake in July. And in the meantime, though, if we can work with an international development partner in having some sort of rapid assessment survey, which we are doing currently with the UN Resident Coordinator's Office, we will do that. So we can have a rapid assessment survey as just a first guide as to what's happening. But in terms of having feedback on the effects of COVID-19 on the labor force, the labor force survey as it exists will be extremely useful in of itself. And we could also, in addition to that, moving forward, if we feel the need in terms of, we can attach certain COVID-19 modules to the survey going forward. but just to know that all these things come with a cost, and the longer you have your survey, the greater the respondent burden on people who have to respond. And so we feel if you focus on your core data sets, you would answer many of the questions that you have as to how the COVID-19 has affected the population as a whole. Thank you.
Could you just, for clarification and for the listening public, tell us when was the last labor force survey conducted?
Well, the labor force survey is conducted quarterly. In terms of what is the latest that we have published data for, we just recently finished the third quarter of 2020. And soon thereafter, we will have the fourth quarter of 2020. We understand that, that this data set the timeliness needs to be improved, and, working with our ministry and our permanent secretary, we have been greatly assisted in hiring more staff, field staff, and in the process now of catching up. So we really do intend by the middle of this year to have our labor force survey up to date by the end of June, and which means we will have first quarter 2022 data by the end of June. And that's a commitment on the part of CSO and our ministry.
Okay, thank you, Chair.
Mr. Blanchard, is it possible, the question has been asked of us, that a national registry can be established where all the data gathering agencies can, come together, probably under your head, and have that posted so that people doing a variety of research can actually go to that head source and get whatever data they need? It would mean you're liaising with different agencies, and some of them will probably keep close to their hearts and chest certain information, but you may find there are ways of getting around that. You look at what's happening in other jurisdictions, sometimes it's much easier to find out information from other parts of the world in a particular area than you can find out from, your own country.
Right. So, you point out that, of course, it would be useful as the CSO, as the main coordinator of the National Statistical System, to collect all of the data sets that we need, socioeconomic data sets, and be able to disseminate that data. But then that really focusing on another important point is that the CSO have the authority to enforce that coordinating role, which is our mandate, which is our responsibility. But do we have the structure in place and the authority in place to make us enforce that mandate? So, of course, it's a very good idea, and that's one of the benefits of moving to the new organization. It does have an enhanced authority to coordinate, give the NSO an enhanced authority to coordinate. In fact, in one of the versions of the bill, there was a National Statistical Coordinating Committee with all of the permanent secretaries, the THA, members of businesses, and the director general of that new organization would liaise with them in ensuring that you collect the data sets from these ministries and external stakeholders. And by the positions I've just mentioned, you permanent secretary, you're dealing with high-level people who have the power to ensure that their ministry supply the CSO with that data. So I really do think that the move to the new organization is going to enhance our coordinating role and bring to fruition what you have just suggested, and which is part of our mandate in of itself. To coordinate the collection of data, have that data readily available, and be able to disseminate data to researchers and academics, and have it in one place, as you said, and that requires having a database administrator and all these other positions that CSO doesn't have right now. And so, I keep repeating that we must make that transition to the new organization, and the sooner it happens, the better. And I look forward to having that extra authority and to meet the commitments demanded of the NSO. Thank you.
Thank you.
Chair, if I may.
You may.
Thank you. Just to follow up on where you were, Mr. Blanchard, how is the cooperation with the entities to which you're trying to retrieve this information from? Is it that you meet with resistance, or is it that it is normally cordial and you get what you ask for? And is it that you need to, what is the situation like that?
All right. So for most of the organizations and ministries, for instance, Ministry of Labor, what they've requested is what's been requested over many, many years. So we have an established working relationship. We know what they want, and they know what we have. But still, there's room to have more formal agreements in place. I think what's been, for instance, there's a national labor market information system, and what's been proposed is developing an MOU between the various departments of government and the ministry, including the CSO, and that's one way to go. We've have developed an MOU with the Registrar General's office to collect vital statistics, births and deaths. So these are the MOUs. Can act as a intermediate step in terms of enforcing that. So there's a lot of data that we collect routinely that we've established good relationships with, but there is still sometimes a need for persuasion and dialogue and meeting, especially in terms of meeting deadlines. And these are areas that we still have to work on. And MOUs can help, but I think that's something to be more permanent and more structured in terms of the relationship between the NSO, the CSO that is, and the various data providers.
What of the private sector specifically?
Well, we collect data from the private sector in terms of the individual establishments. Our economic surveys would survey the establishments. And to that extent, we depend on the law and the ability of the private sector establishment to agree to obey the law and supply the CSO with data. And that exists in the current act, but we do need to have greater penalties in terms of enforcing that demand for data from private sector organizations. We do relate to private sector organizations beyond the individual organization, chambers of commerce, for instance, and other organizations where they help us a lot, where they have societies, they have lists of organizations which we use to update our register of establishments. And so for many of these, like chambers of commerce, we do have a working relationship with them in terms of supplying us with lists of organizations and developing our database.
Change is always painful. Sorry?
No,
Change.
I was saying thank you.
Oh. Change is always, very often, I would say, painful and disruptive. So in your proposed change, the proposed change of the CSO to the National Statistical Institute, have you encountered any form of resistance to the proposed change? And how are you managing that, if it is so?
Internally or externally?
Both?
Yeah, okay. Internally, I think, and the public might be surprised to know that as much as the public might be hard on us, the staff of the CSO are harder on themselves. They know that we can do better and they want to do better. And we are aware of whatever shortcomings we have, and we feel we have done enough, and that we produce, and what we produce we have not acknowledged for, but we do know that we can do better. And so the staff are generally optimistic, in my opinion, in terms of having a better CSO. They do not like the constant bringing down of the organization. It reflects on them. So, there are one or two individuals, of course, who are resistant. Mostly, so that you'll have that in any organization, and they probably thinking of their own personal needs as I do. But I do think that the vast majority of staff are looking forward to a better organization, not to mention better pay as well, but and so they are optimistic about it. Externally, of course, there's very little resistance, even from people who admire the work that the CSO does, and we have a great reputation. You know, CSO is dependent. Once you want to carry out a major household survey, any large scale survey, there's only one organization can do that, and that's the CSO. That and you know, for all the talk, they rely on our expertise. We are invited to numerous committees for our expertise, and so externally, but they do want to see the organization improve even better, have greater independence, have greater control in terms of governance issues. And in terms of the change management plan for the CSO, you know, we have been working in terms of improving the skill sets and have plans to improve the skill sets of employees, and they are grateful for that. Building better feedback in terms of how we access our data. In fact, right now we are in the process of undertaking an employee survey, working with the International Development Bank, again, Inter-American Development Bank. They have hired someone who's, you know, asking employees questions about what they think of their career prospects, what they think of their management, and that's ongoing. So we shortly should get feedback on that. So, but externally, you know, there's no resistance, and internally, quite a few of the staff are willing to see a better organization and a better reputation for the organization that they work for. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Ramrad. Member Ramrad.
Yeah, thank you very much. I wanted to ask, while you work on the CSO and the future, what steps have been taken to improve the data collection and transmission from the ministries in particular? And do you see a time when the CSO will actually place its own staff in the ministries to ensure that the data is collected in a particular manner and it is transmitted to the CSO in a timely manner?
Well, placing staff in organizations, you know, many of the ministries and departments have their own statistical units. Ministry of Health and Ministry of Education, for instance, and Ministry of Agriculture. And they work closely with the CSO. And how we prioritize collecting data is really developing that relationship at a personal level and working with the staff. And for the regular type data sets, we do get them. We have sometimes issue with timeliness of collecting the data. But, you know, for the large part, we do get cooperation, and our focus is more on dialogue in terms of working with the ministries. I do feel that, you know, if we do have a coordinating committee, it will enhance that role for us to collect data from ministries, to collect that data on a timely basis. And we do have an MOU with the Board of Inland Revenue to collect high frequency related tax data, which will help with our GDP estimates. And that part of that MOU does provide for staff going to the Inland Revenue to collect data and to be used in our estimates of GDP. But you know, it generally might be impractical to have staff going individually. It might be better to have better trained staffs within the ministry that understand the role of the CSO and to establish a structural relationship where that data flows on a regular basis to the CSO rather than staff going there. If you do have the need, as in the case with the taxation data, for staff to go there, that should be more the exception than the rule, in my opinion.
One further question: How would you describe the quality of the data from the ministries now, and the state of the relationship between ministries and CSO?
Right. I mean, it like everything in life, it varies. Different ministries are different from others. You know, I have to be frank here as your director, and not that I want to put down anyone, but we can have a better relationship with the Registrar General's office in terms of getting data on vital statistics. We have worked with them in the past, but I do think the relationship can be better. And so it does vary from ministry to ministry, but basically, I do think, my personal opinion is that we should have something more structured in place via a new organization and a new act that gives that coordinating role and power to the CSO and we need that data. Without the data, the CSO cannot produce. So it's extremely important that ministries understand this. We've tried to convey that to them, and they depend on us in turn from the data that we produce. So there is a self-interest involved. Thank you.
Now, you mentioned that two major barriers to the transition to the National Statistical Institute were failure for the bill to be approved and inability to fund the transition. Now, have you made any representation to Cabinet to have the legislation prioritized? Any feedback, if that was so, please? And tell us, what is the estimated dollar value of the proposed overhaul of the CSO and the establishment of the National Statistical Institute? And given government's financial constraints, can this project be realistically prioritized at this time?
All right. So, we are in constant communication with our ministry, and our ministry is working with us. They are very well aware of the needs of the CSO in terms of moving to the new organization. We at the CSO have invested a lot of time and commitment in terms of putting our input into the bill itself. In terms of funding issues for the CSO and the legislative agenda, those are some things that are outside the power of the CSO itself. But our Ministry of Planning and Development is very well aware of the importance of the organization and the need for funding. But there are certain things outside the control of in my power itself. And I don't know if, Mr. Raj may want to add.
Thank you, Chair, for the question. And with respect to the priority, the last challenge really was when the matter lapsed with respect to the Joint Select Committee at the time. And we continue to work with the Office of the Attorney General as we move forward to try to resolve the issue with respect to the special majority clause. We've put several options forward. The ministry has written to the Attorney General and awaits the guidance as to how the bill should be put forward. And once we get that guidance, we will return to Cabinet if it's necessary to ask for it to be a priority. With respect to the financial transition, the cost of transitioning to the National Statistical Institute will be quite large, but because of course, the new organization talks about the eventual closure of the Central Statistical Office to the NSITT, and that will have implications in terms of staff movement, etc. But the law outlines all the different modes in which that can happen. So there will be a human capacity cost associated in terms of employment, new technology, equipment. So we do anticipate that it will be costly. We don't have a current value for this transition. That will be based, of course, on the model that is eventually decided by the law and by the Cabinet of Trinidad and Tobago. But we do anticipate that it will be a very costly exercise. But I want to reiterate what Mr. Blanchard has been saying, that if we want to get all the data sets and the kind of quality of data and the constant development of new data sets with our national statistical system, and of course the demands of the public as it relates to responding to social and economic issues, would require that the organization be properly financed, developed into getting the organization that we want. And I think, as I said earlier, the National Statistical, the Central Statistical Office and a statistical office in general is really critical to the governance of any country. So a strong, robust organization would be vital for us to be able to do all that we need to do. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Members, any further questions?
We have one question from the public, specifically that came up on the chat, with respect to the Freedom of Information Act statement by the CSO. When last has one been published? Because of course, those statements that are required by law give a lot of information to the public with respect to what's available and the work of the CSO. Can you just tell us, for the benefit of the public, when last that statement has been published?
Just excuse me one moment. Right. So I do not know when it was the last one that was published. I'll be honest with you. But we are currently working on providing that last on statement on the freedom of information. So that's my answer in a nutshell. But to the extent that we have our website, we have that will list the type of data that we have available, any type of data sets that can be obtained from the CSO. We have, we are adhering to the enhanced general data dissemination standards from the IMF in terms of what data sets, certain core data sets, and how it's produced and prepared. And so that's an issue that we are working on, and if need be, we can provide you with further information later.
Yes, so I think, since the question of the public, you can provide it later.
Yeah, before you go on, I just want to say that, maybe the information can be provided in writing to us, and we'll deal with it then. Thank you.
Yes.
And if I may be so, if Madam Chair, I'll also say that the Ministry of Planning, as CSO is not a public authority, they would fall under the Ministry of Planning's Freedom of Information report. So on that, as I said, we have not published for a while, but we are in the process of preparing that for publication within the next month.
Non-permanent secretary. Sorry.
Oh, yeah, I just had one further question, Chair, but you can go ahead and then I'll ask my question.
Go ahead.
Oh, thank you. With respect to training, and we were provided with some information, particularly if there's this drive for ICT and so on, do you foresee a greater need or a different type of training that would be necessary? And again, what impact would this have on your budget for staff training? Because I think that's always a concern with the training of your staff going forward if you're looking at new methods of data collection and data processing and so on. Have you all done an analysis of what are going to be the training needs?
Yes, so basically our training needs will be determined by our plans for product development. For instance, there are different levels of training. For instance, for non-professional staff, meaning staff not with having statistical degrees or degrees with statistics in it, we do plan to work with the IDB in terms of development an in-service training program that will train the staff in terms of the basic concepts of National Statistical Offices, the basic measures, how it's computed and why. Or in terms of economic output data or GDP, etc., I talked about wanting to extend the number of accounts that we produce, and that drives then into the training requirements. And then we're working with the IMF, CARTAC, and they're constantly undertaking training courses in terms of development of statistical capacity development in national accounts development. The same IMF, CARTAC deals with prices, and to the extent that when we do revise our index of retail prices, which we use to calculate inflation, that again will drive the need for training in that area. There's also the need, just generally in terms of making estimates for non-response data, imputation for non-response. That's a major aspect of large data sets that we can undertake training in. We, as the Permanent Secretary has mentioned, we have acquired staff recently, highly qualified staff, many of them with postgraduate degrees or pursuing postgraduate degrees in statistics or statistics-related work, and that'll enhance our capacity to lead them into the training for some of these higher-end areas. There is the talk of using big data and utilizing big data and how it can help. That does require training in data science. So that will impact again on our training needs. In terms of the ICT, there is the need for ICT staff, especially in the area of database administration. The CSO is constantly having to produce more and more data sets. If we are going to be the coordinator of the national statistical system, we need to have a database plan and action, and that requires training in database management, and so those are areas that we are focused on in terms of our training needs. They're driven by the need to produce certain products, and that in turn drives the training.
Madam Chair, if I may.
Yes, please, Mr. Sutherland.
Yeah,
Mr. Backus?
Just following up on the last answer, and this relates really to the technical infrastructure. I get the feeling that you're managing your data, you're bringing it into your own data storage, and then manipulating it. Hence the reason why you need database administrators. A lot of that. Is the CSO and of course through the Ministry of Planning looking at putting all of this into a cloud where your focus is not on the technology itself, but really on the manipulation and utilization of the technology, so that you get the benefits of scalability, you get the benefits of the protection, you get the benefits of the enhanced security of living within a cloud environment, a global cloud environment. And all you really are concerned about are the applications that you are running and the manipulation of the data itself. Is that part of your roadmap, or is it that the intent is to remain standalone gear living within your own environment?
Right. I mean, the issue with, and again, I'm not an IT expert, but the issue that when with cloud storage, etc., is just ensuring that the confidentiality and the security of the data exists. Now, I know there are ways to do that. But for right now in the short term, we will concentrate on managing that data in-house. That way, we are pretty sure of the security of the data sets, and that they are much more control of it and storing it on servers. Especially with the use of the new technology that can be explored, and the CSO, wanting to produce the very best and have the very best organization for the future, in whatever format it takes. Quite willing to take these recommendations and see if we can implement some of them. But there is that issue of data security that might be an issue.
Again, Chair, to you, I would implore you to re-examine that position. Have your IT expertise and I know you're using international organizations, the IDB and so on. Look into that concept. I can all but assure you that anything you have in-house could not be as secure as the things that would have been in other places.
All right. As I said, we're quite willing to explore those opportunities or those ideas.
Yeah, certainly. So I suggest you do as well. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Now, Madam Permanent Secretary she wrote about the staff and competency shortages. And we've heard here today a lot about technical expertise and the need for a particular type of staff, especially moving into the new organization. I've looked at the qualifications of staff and university degrees and so on, statistical work, and even with lower level, you ask for in their 5 levels that they have English language and mathematics throughout. I've also noted that the CSO liaises and people from these various entities get information from the Central Statistical Office. So you are liaising with government ministries, department agencies, Ministry of Planning and Development, Ministry of Finance, Labor, Trade, national committees, and you have a list here, interministerial child labor organizations created by statute, central bank, CARICOM Secretariat, academic institutions, particularly University of the West Indies, international organizations, including United Nations and other development partners, such as the International American Development Bank, Monetary IMF, international rated agencies, and so on. So you are out there and you are communicating with a number of agencies. And you have communicated with the Parliament. And you have submitted a report to the Parliament. And it doesn't give me any great pleasure to say so, but I really must make the point that the report has been extremely deficient. And to see that something is submitted to the Parliament of this country that has so many points of deficiency, I am very, very your competency, of staff, because I have noted several errors in this report, basic errors of writing, that it really saddens me. And I don't know what is going on out there, because whenever you communicate, you are really communicating on behalf of the government of Trinidad and Tobago, and certain standards must be maintained. As I say, it doesn't give me any joy, but please be very careful and make sure that what is written is always grammatically correct. There are too many errors in this report. So you please look at what you have. If you need to get in some proofreaders or somebody competent, please do it. But I shudder to think that what we were faced with, that is also going out there. Data, plural, noun, can't take a singular verb. And there's so much of that. Wrong prepositions and all of those things. In this 2022, with all the money spent on education and training, I can't be making this point all the time, and this is not at all acceptable. Something needs to be done and done urgently if this is what is going out there in the name of Trinidad and Tobago in other areas. It really has to be dealt with as a matter of urgency. It's happening in other agencies, but I've never seen it in a Joint Select Committee report before today, to that extent. Invite closing remarks from the ministry and the CSO.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. On behalf of the Ministry of Planning and Development, I thank you for the opportunity to present today. The meeting has been very informative, and we take your guidance, certainly in terms of the commentary with respect to the submission, and we will review and ensure that it meets the standard that is expected of the ministry. With respect to the follow-up work that was requested, we will undertake to do a number of the bits of advice that was given by the membership, certainly in terms of the policy for interacting with the public with respect to how do we collect data in a pandemic environment. We will undertake to provide more details with respect to the data on the training and some of the other data sets that have been recommended, and certainly in terms of the new technology and methodology that we have been exposed to today. The Ministry of Planning wants to reiterate that the move to the National Statistical Institute is really a priority for us. We are challenged by the constraints of the special majority, and we do hope that this is a very important part of us achieving where we want to go, because the National Statistical Institute will help us to improve our efficiency and effectiveness in terms of data collection and data dissemination. So thank you for the advice and the guidance today, Madam Chair. Ms. Blanchard.
Yes, so the CSO would, like to thank the committee for inviting us to give our side of the story, so to speak, to present some of the good things that we have done. I know there's a lot more work that needs to be done in terms of extending the range of products that we use, particularly in the social sector side. I do think that we are making some great progress on our economic indicator side in terms of our quarterly GDP and extending the range of accounts that we have that are going to produce. The labor force aspect of it, I think, we are going to have a revised labor force, and we are going to meet the timeliness required of the nation, of the CSO, in terms of that data set. We have, in recent times, adhered to the enhanced general data dissemination system of the IMF, where we have a advanced release calendar. I think that's, in my time, that's one of the more noteworthy things, that you have an advanced release calendar for the core statistical products of the CSO, stating when it's going to be released and the timeliness. So these are important progress points that we have taken into account. And as I said, we do acknowledge that we need to improve, we will improve, and then, we look forward to the future with optimism and to implement the new technologies that we've spoken about today that will be used in future generation, and including the computer-assisted personal interview and computer-assisted web interviewing, and given a revised organization with an enhanced staff, we can undertake more of the research demands, to improve our products and improve the quality of our products and extend the range of our products. So again, thank you for giving us this opportunity to tell our side of the story.
Thank you for your contribution to today's proceedings. We've certainly learned a lot about your operations, and I think we've been able to identify what needs to be done to take you on the way forward to where you want to go, all for the good of the country. We thank members who participated remotely in this virtual hearing. Again, as always, we thank the staff of the Office of the Parliament for procedural and logistical support. We don't know how you did it. We know what happened, on Wednesday would have impacted severely on you, and so the time frame was shortened somewhat, and you did come through with all that you had to do to assist us in this very, very, very important exercise. We thank the viewing and listening audience, and we look forward to whatever submissions you have to make to us or you wish to make to our meeting, our committee in writing. We certainly will include them in our report at the end of the day. And it's left for me to say we are now at the end of our meeting, and enjoy your lunch The reason I spoke about potato earlier, Mr. Bacchus is smiling because I cooked curry chana and potato this morning to eat with my roti, my frozen roti that I thawed out. So I'm going to have a lovely curry lunch. So it's not only potato, but the chana as well. So enjoy your lunch, all of you. And do have a good weekend. And we see you next month with another exercise. So I know I may not be able to escape RD, but we'll deal with it when the time comes. Mr. Bacchus, you know what RD is, huh? Have a good weekend, everyone.
Thank you, everybody. Have a good afternoon.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'm glad the potato had nothing to do with the doubles.
Chairman, thank you very much. I will be passing for my share.
It's a good thing you don't know where to find me.
Chair, you're lucky you're in quarantine.